Good afternoon, everyone. We'll begin our program in about 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah Cott, Senior Vice President of Programming at The Hill. Thank you for joining us in person and also online for our event today, Making the Grade, Solving the U.S. Math Problem. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Collaborative for Student Success, for their support of the discussion. We're here today to talk about U.S. math education. Many states have laws aimed at improving literacy, but few are putting the same weight behind targeting math instruction. A recent study found that middle and elementary school students' math progress stagnated last year. On average, students need the equivalent of an additional 4.5 months of instruction in math to catch up to pre-pandemic levels. But this downward trend began years before the health crisis, raising questions about a decade of disappointing results for math students and economic and civil repercussions to come. Which states are leading the charge to solve the math crisis, and how did the coronavirus wreak havoc on math? And how can the United States close the performance gap between advantaged and disadvantaged students? We will answer those questions and more. But before we get underway, please silence your cell phones, but keep them out because we have a very fun interactive program today as part of our presentation, so make sure you have your phones in your hand and you have your QR codes on your chair. And you can also online follow us on Facebook and Twitter at The Hill Events. We will be using the hashtag HillEducation. And with that, I am delighted to welcome Adam Erzing, Deputy Director at the Collaborative for Student Success, to begin the interactive portion of our program. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome again to Making the Grade, Solving the U.S. Math Problem. As was said, I'm Adam Erzing, Deputy Director of the Collaborative for Student Success, and we are thrilled to be sponsoring today's discussion. As part of the event today, as was mentioned, we're going to ask you to weigh in on some different messages that currently frame math discussions, both in the classroom and amongst policymakers around the country. To do that, we'll share 4 interactive polling questions on the screen spread throughout today's program. Each will present you with a common argument for advancing math education, and we will ask you to choose the message that resonates with you the most. The final question today will actually ask you to rank all the messages that you've seen from most compelling to least. We're going to share the first question now to get us started. On your smartphone or device, please go to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and use the code #TheHillEducation to view and answer the first question. During the rest of the event, we will ask you to return to that screen to answer the remaining poll questions. Thank you, and we're excited to learn how you think math education should be advanced in this country.
Thank you, Adam. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Bob Kuzak, Editor-in-Chief of The Hill, to the stage. He will be interviewing Congressman Jim Baird, a co-sponsor of the Mathematical and Statistical Modeling Education Act, and Congressman Bill Foster, co-sponsor of the newly introduced Keep STEM Talent Act. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for joining us. I know it's a busy time, and let me ask a little news of the day, news of the week, news of the month. Congressman Foster, we'll start with you. Are we going to have a government shutdown?
Well, that's really not something I, as a Democrat, have a lot of control over, frankly. This is, I get asked that a lot. But I think what you need, particularly if you're in the minority party when this is happening, you need a coping mechanism. So during I think 2 shutdowns ago, when Ted Cruz was holding the floor of the Senate reading Green Eggs and Ham, I went and downloaded, I believe it was TensorFlow, which is the Google open source AI tool, and I just worked through the tutorial on it. And so just sort of reconnected with the AI programming that I used to do back when I was a physicist. And so, and this is at least one of my many coping mechanisms to deal with the insanity of what's happening.
Congressman, what do you think? Do you think we're going to keep the government open? The leaders want
certainly.
that.
Pardon me?
The leaders want that.
Yeah, certainly we don't want to, I'm not interested in doing a shutdown, but you can't be sure. There's 435 of us. Bill, we got to decide where we want to go.
Well, let's get into this topic. You both have PhDs. Education has been very important in your paths to success, leading to Capitol Hill. Congressman Foster, start with you. Why are you so passionate about this issue, and why are you here today to talk about it?
Well, I started out, actually, I'm most well known around Capitol Hill as being the PhD physicist.
Right.
So I often introduce myself as saying I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists. and among other things, share all the war guilt over what Oppenheimer and a lot of people I've met did at a very important time in history. And so, that's part of it. That I think that guilt drives a lot of physicists to feel like they should be involved. There is also, every physicist I know, went through this experience where, they realized they were probably the smartest kid in the class, and then they said, "Mommy, Daddy," they wondered if they are the smartest kid in the universe, and then who's the smartest person in the world? Oh, that's Albert Einstein. What did he do? He was a physicist. And so that drives you into physics. So I'm not really a decent control sample for trying to optimize things. But my wife is Korean, also a scientist, and to get out of high school in Korea, you need to know calculus. Mm-hmm. All right, so that means that the politicians in Korea can talk to their voting public about things like max-min problems and these fundamental mathematical concepts that are simply foreign to a big part of the public. And that hurts because there are some beautiful mathematical principles that even if you can't calculate the details are very important to absorb. The trade-offs intrinsic to everything. The simple thing that we argue about all the time is what is the optimum tax rate? It's not 0% because that's, the Horn of Africa and it doesn't end well. It's not 100% because that's North Korea and that does not end well. And so it's clear mathematically that there's some optimum tax rate that optimizes growth. That's a calculus problem called the max-min problem, and you can just refer to that as an obvious thing to some members of the voting public and not others.
Congressman Baird, can you talk about your background as well as why math is so important for the future of the United States?
Well, I think that becomes a national security issue in the end, because if our students can't stay current or ahead of some of these other countries, and China is an example, then it becomes a national security issue. And so we really want to figure out ways to get our young people involved and excited. I would just share with you as an example, but not to brag. I will share with you when I was doing my research work, master's degree and then the PhD. got down to the tissue level or to that cellular level, and mammalian tissue, that cell across many of the species is very similar. That you can't even see it except under a microscope, and that little organism takes in food and it excretes byproducts and so on. I'm trying to tell you is the further I got into that, the more excited I became. And so then math is a part of that. You need to understand math in order to make calculations that you cannot be sure how that's going to come out, and yet the math can take you there. So I think it's extremely important that our students have the ability to be competitive around the world. And I would just share, Bill, one of the things that I've seen as I looked at ways to get involved and get students involved in the STEM, I think the hands-on really works. I remember seeing one little example for young children in first 2 or 3 grades of school that all they had was a fish tank, and they had soil and sod on the top and the fish in the tank, but they cycled the water. It was a closed system, and some of those kids were really getting involved in that. And so then figuring out the math on how the water could be purified as it goes through the plants above the tank, the impact of the fish in that tank. It doesn't sound very exciting, but to those young kids, the teaching opportunities there were significant, and they wanted to get involved. So then, the other thing that I see is the cell phones and the speed at which we're getting into technology. It's going to take math to figure it out. If you go into some of the, toured, Bill, I'm sure you have too. When you tour some of these plants that we have around, like in West Central Indiana, I'm talking about these manufacturing facilities. Then you go in there, and most of those products are made with robots and so on. And you have to have a technician that's capable of servicing that machine, and that takes math and science. So, and then as we want to advance on further, you get into space, and we're talking about going to Mars. That takes math and science. And but my part of it is agriculture, and Bill, I've told Bill about this before, so if he smiles, don't worry about it. But anyway, my PhD is in monogastric nutrition. And what's mono? One. What's gastric? Stomach, right? Pigs for short. So anyway, there's not a lot of demand for that around here. But it did give me a science background that I really appreciate. And by the way, since I'm on the pigs, their digestive physiology, and most of you probably don't know that, is very similar to yours. You could live on their diet, and they could live on yours. And the last thing I want to tell you about pigs is that, and I could go for a long time, Bill. That's all right. But anyway.
That's better than me going on about, grand unified theories of physics. I think it's.
Yeah, the pigs don't understand that, I can tell you that. Anyway, the last thing I want to tell you about pigs, because I think it's fair to them, they would just as soon have a shower and be cool and clean like you are. But the fact is, they do not have sweat glands. So the only way they have control in their body temperature is through evaporative cooling. And so then they go to water. Well, in a lot of cases, there's mud associated with water in the end, so they're covered with mud, and that's not fair to the pigs.
I see. And they do this all by calculating mathematically the rate of heat loss through evaporative cooling.
It all comes down to math. I may have a pig question follow-up, which a phrase I've never said before. But Congressman Foster, as far as kids not being as good or as good as they can be in math, what are the ramifications of that? Because you say that we've got a math problem. What does it mean?
Right. Well, first off, it depends on what your system of governance is. If you're an autocratic system, the last thing you want is an educated electorate. You want people to sort of have the minimum level of education. If you're a democratic government, you want everyone fully able to participate in the complex issues of the day. So they're different incentives, and it's a bigger tragedy for a democracy when you don't have people at all levels that understand things. It's also not important that they be able to calculate the details exactly. It's one of the things I've really been struck with since I've switched from science to politics, is that there's a big separation between each level of the technology stack. For example, I designed integrated circuits during my time in physics. I have a pretty good idea exactly what happens inside a cell phone, and that is absolutely no help in my ability to be an effective social media influencer. There's just a complete separation between that. And so maybe you sort of have to know what goes down one level in the technology stack, but not all the way to the bottom. And so that you can be successful in life without the mathematical details. But what you need to have is an idea to understand get a quick estimate of what the big numbers are. One of my frustrations in politics is that politicians will stand up and they'll list 6 arguments which are tiny arguments in one direction, and one which is a huge argument in the other direction, and then conclude, well, since there are 5 people saying these 5 arguments, that must be right, and not netting out, in an approximate mathematical way, what the most important effects are that we really have to pay attention to. And so it's that quick estimate that's more of an engineering thing actually than a scientist thing. Engineers are always looking at something and say, yeah, that looks like that beam's about right, it probably won't collapse. But that's a different skill, and we need that in the public to just understand when someone's blowing smoke, because the numbers, without adding them up in detail, the numbers in a rough sense just don't make sense.
You both have legislation, Congressman Foster, I want to start with you, that would attempt to solve or begin to solve this problem. Tell us about the Keep STEM Talent Act. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. Do you see that possibly moving and maybe being attached to some vehicle? Tell us about the bill and its chances.
Well, sure. Well, it simply can be described as just stapling a green card to a PhD or master's thesis for STEM fields. Because, the reality is that if we're going to have to react in, say, artificial intelligence in the next few years, or we're going to drop behind. We're not going to start with first graders. They're not going to be able to participate on the time scale we need. But there is that talent from around the world. In fact, if you look at a lot of the big breakthroughs that led to this, they're from researchers from all over the world working in America, but from all over the world. And if we push them away, as we currently do, it's actively insane. At the very top of my list of what we came within one senator of getting this into the omnibus is simply, at least for Russian STEM scientists, when they get an advanced degree, we should give them a green card, to this sort of a way of kicking Vladimir Putin where he may be sensitive, and taking away what they need in order to have an advanced armed forces. And we hired a lot of we hired a lot of Russians after sorry about that. We hired a lot of Russians at the collapse of the Cold War. Because I was working in a national lab, and we just said, go out and visit Russia, and anyone who can really contribute, hire and bring them in. And we got so much fantastic work from those brilliant Russians that were just geniuses trapped in an unbelievably bad system. And so there are people like that all over the developing world and in some of our enemies that could make a tremendous contribution here. So that's why I think that's very much at the top of my list.
But you had a senator block that bill going into an omnibus in the past.
That's right. And so that was the Russian part. And now I have my collaborator in this is another member of the Science Committee, Jay Obernolte, to try to get the Russian part of this done. And there's standalone legislation, and we're looking to attach it to anything that moves.
Okay.
That should be the easy thing for everyone, unless you truly love Vladimir Putin.
Right. Congressman Baird, you have the Mathematical and Statistical Modeling Education Act. This passed 323 to 92 in the House last year. There's a companion legislation, also bipartisan, in the upper chamber. Can this get done? Can this be attached maybe to a moving vehicle appropriations, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely. I mean, that bill looks at providing grants to universities or NGOs that are involved in finding new ways to attract young people into the STEM curriculum. And so the fact that we can get involved, like I was talking about earlier, we can use that technology to be able to stimulate them and to try and bring this to reality. We've been concerned about the number of chips or chip manufacturing and bringing that back to this country. And we had a CHIPS bill last year. But the thing that I learned in that is how many chips do you think there are in a vehicle? And I thought, 1 or 2 chips and why we couldn't get those put together, Bill. But actually there's 1,100 to 1,700 chips in a vehicle. So there you start to realize how important the knowledge base is and the STEM base is to learn how to do that technology. And so we've got a program going on at Purdue because of the CHIPS Act to teach young people how to manufacture chips. They're into an 18-inch wafer and it's loaded with chips, and so it's not only a learning experience for those students so that they can go ahead and develop in the manufacturing of chips, but it demonstrates science and technology, STEM professions, the need for them.
Congressman, just talking about education, it's become more partisan over the years, certainly in the wake of the pandemic. This was an issue before the pandemic. But can you talk about the partisanship? I mean, you're both appearing here. You're in different parties. You know each other. Can you talk a little about that and how it's really blocked a lot of legislation?
Yeah, well, it's a frustration because particularly STEM education is not as controversial as, say, history. Because it's impossible to teach history without inserting a lot of cultural bias. Just what you think the important things that happened in the past. You can't teach all things that happened in the past, so you have to pick and choose. That injects cultural bias, and I think a democratic debate is the way to solve that. And so, there's a lot of angst about people that have not been involved in school boards getting involved. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. There is nothing more important to argue about than the education of the next generation of kids. But I think the big thing that's coming at us is AI tutors, because it is going to be revolutionary. Actually, a little over 10 years ago when I lost in the Tea Party wave election, and I spent 2 years not in Congress, the first thing you do is you make a list of everything you could do with the rest of your life. And so number 2 on the list, after, for good or ill, returning to Congress, was to actually design an AI tutor. So I went and downloaded a motion recognition kit, software kits and stuff like this, to see how they would work, with the idea that we could do 10 years ago, which was impossible, but is possible now, to make something that's as good as the gold standard, which is an individual tutor for each child. And I imagine most of you have tutored people at some point, and the way it works is you explain it to them, and then you look in their face to see if they get it or not. And if they get it, then you go on to the next point. If they don't get it, you explain it in a different way. You can use emotion recognition, that is a feature of artificial intelligence, to make a spectacular AI tutor. And places like the Khan Academy and probably 100 startups have latched onto that concept. And it's going to be very important that we look at the cultural biases that are being injected by those at the same time. It's well known to educators that you get best performance out of a student if you have a cultural match between the tutor and the student. But that can very easily devolve into the soft bigotry of low expectations. Mm-hmm. And so trying to make sure that isn't inadvertently programmed into what we do. But it's wonderful. Everyone's probably played with different chatbots, and my favorite chatbot is the chatbot Pi, which is from Inflection AI. It's Mustafa Suleyman, who's one of the thoughtful person that has this company. And what I love about it, it's Socratic. That it will ask you a question, or you ask it a question, and it gives you an answer, and it says, but here is an important issue, and then it asks, what do you think about this? And it reminds me of the discussions that I had with my father. You know, my dad was also a scientist who left science to become a civil rights lawyer and ended up writing a lot of the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But when I was growing up, he would have these Socratic discussions with me. You know, he'd be saying, well, why do you think it is that leaves are green? And we'd go on into chlorophyll and everything, and just, you know, I have very fond memories of that. And now anyone will be able to have a tutor that will be able to explain scientifically and whatever level of detail the kid's ready to understand why leaves are green or not.
You have a few minutes left. If anyone from the audience wants to ask a question, you can wait for the mics, and if you can identify yourself and ask a brief question, hopefully we can get a couple in. Yes, but go ahead. While we search for somebody, go ahead.
You know, I think Bill's right about artificial intelligence, and yet I think we have to make sure that we understand, you know, instead of asking Siri about this or that and get a response, I think we need to challenge somehow and incorporate into that to make sure you use your head. I mean to be able to think through a process. And that's compatible with what Bill just said. So I think it's very important that we learn techniques on how to analyze something and how to use the brain that God gave us.
But along those lines, I don't think we have any questions from the audience yet, but Congressman Foster, just the future of AI makes a lot of people nervous. You're still going to need teachers, right? How is that going to work? What is the future of AI in education?
Yeah, I think what teachers will do, they'll intercept it when the AI said, you know, I've been trying to explain this 4 different ways. The kid is smart enough that they should have gotten past it. Why don't you go and see if the kid's having problems at home? And the teacher's job will be to emotionally intervene when just the straightforward, here is the lesson plan, you know, maybe customized for the student, but here's the basic lesson plan. When it goes off course, the teacher has to do the emotional intervention, and I think that will be the big part. And to make sure that kids are developing socially. That,
yeah,
you know,
that's important.
Because that's more, you know, there's a school I read about somewhere that has a program where all the kids are matched up randomly every day for 1 day a week. And then they go out in pairs and walk a mile around together and talk, just 2 kids talking. And then at the end, they have to write a little essay about what they talked about. And so this is deliberately socializing kids to talk to strangers. And I think, you know, that struck me as something I wish I had when I was a kid.
Right, the nice strangers, right?
Well, in a protected environment.
Right, yes,
a protected
exactly.
environment to
Yeah.
actually, you know, it's a missing skill, especially after COVID.
Especially after COVID. We got a question in the back.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? All right, thank you, Representative Jim and Bill. What an incredibly important issue for us to tackle as a nation. And by the way, I'm Andrew Sachs. I'm with Nobel Learning. We're a global social learning network for youth, kids teaching kids, among other things, social skills, right? The question I have is, in the era of AI and automation and all the data in IT, should we be just focusing on what AI teaches them, or is that actually setting them up for jobs that won't exist? Should we be focusing more or also on top of those social skills that will exist on top of the computers and automation that are happening?
Give it a shot? No, I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be crucial. You know, it's hard teachers are having a heck of a time right now trying to figure out what they should be teaching their kids. You know, even things like computer code. You know, if you look at 20 years ago, everyone was saying, okay, kids have to learn HTML, right? Because in the future, everyone's going to maintain their own web page. And now we've got, you know, 5 billion web page maintainers that just maintain their Facebook page and don't know a word of HTML, and it doesn't matter. And so trying to understand how deep the technology stack, you actually need how many people. You know, for example, the number of chip designers that we need. You know, chips are absolutely crucial, but I'd be surprised if 1/100% of all humanity is actually required to know chip design to provide all the cell phones that we need.
Also a chip designer.
All right, oh, neat. Well, I am, okay. Well, I'm very proud that I've designed 10 chips. Every one of them has worked the first time, okay?
Nice.
No spins on my part. I was
Okay.
feeling up.
Congressman Baird, got 30 seconds. Give you a last word. Just your final thoughts on this space and where we need to go from here.
Well, I started off by saying that we got to find ways to challenge and make it interesting for young people to want to get into math and science and STEM.
Yeah. That's the key. And do you think the incentives are there now? Do you think there's enough interest, or you just have to encourage them? Because you don't want to force kids into stuff.
Well, I think there's a way to use these, these computers are becoming quantum computers and all that. I think there's probably some way to entice young people to get involved through the use of the computers and programs. And I think, Bill, you alluded to that some too. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time. Please thank our two lawmakers for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Representative Baird and Representative Foster. We're going to show a short video from our sponsor, Collaborative for Student Success, here in the monitor. Thank you.
Math is part of everything we do in life.
With COVID, you're seeing that fourth graders don't have number sense. So when you're expecting them to add and subtract fractions and you haven't given them the foundational skill of how to add and subtract simply, there's going to be a big gap.
The learning loss in mathematics is huge because the students that we're seeing coming through elementary school right now, they've spent a year and a half outside of a classroom. And in a lot of virtual settings, those students, not through any fault of anybody's, didn't get good instruction.
We should be concerned about the math learning loss, especially in elementary school, because that's where all those foundational skills are built.
The National Council for Teachers of Mathematics has already lined out for us, there are important components of math instruction, but in our nation, we haven't necessarily followed through with that. I was looking for a resource that aligned to the research that we know about good math instruction, and a resource that was going to be able to help support teachers along their learning journey as they help their students.
So when Zern came out, even for me, it was this big understanding, this big picture of, oh, this is why this works. So having those tools for our kids, that is able to build a relationship with math and having that confidence now, because now they understand why. It's not just memorization.
I've been using Zern and it has completely changed the way that I teach.
Zern was identified by the state as being a positive program that would allow us to move forward.
And I went into this thinking, this isn't gonna work. It was just a very different way of teaching. But when I started learning about high quality instructional material and how it tells a story and how each year it gets deeper and deeper, I started seeing how implementing this curriculum truly benefited my students.
Zern is a great resource because it aligns with our curriculum. And if they're struggling with a grade level concept, what you can do is assign foundational lessons to help support them. It gives you real-time feedback on what they're struggling with.
This program is more effective with the students because it helps them to reach their individualized goals. So if they're not getting something with the whole class, then the teacher can go back and individualize the program for them.
Since we've started using Zern, the math vocabulary has increased. So now you give these kids the confidence like, I can do math.
So now they're having a love for math that most students don't have when they're walking away from just paper and pencil work.
Teachers are showing a level of excitement, especially our first adopters, that they've never seen before. It's magical.
Now I have kids that are constantly getting on Zern, even on free time.
One of my biggest aha moments was when I had one of my little girls that has been struggling. She struggles with reading and she struggled with math, and she was the one helping a very high achieving student understand the concept. So that was a huge aha moment for me because it empowers students to know and be confident in what they're learning.
I would tell other principals to just give it a try. Try it for a good full 9 weeks. Use it with fidelity and look at your reports, look at your results. You'll see that students will make growth.
If I fast forward 5 years from now and I look at students that have been coming through this program, and I look at teachers that are familiar and comfortable with teaching their curriculum, I'm really excited for what we can do.
So right about now, I'm supposed to be introducing our second math messaging poll, but some of you have actually already figured out that our tech failed us and all of the messages are showing up at once. That being said, we still want you all to weigh in. So please, if you haven't yet, go to slido.com, use that code, #TheHillEducation, and please let us know what you think of the messages. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And now it's time for our sponsor segment. Please welcome Joel Rose, CEO of New Classrooms, a nonprofit organization that leverages classroom design, teacher talent, and technology to enable personalized learning. He is going to give us a presentation. Thank you.
I'm a former teacher. And I remember early in my career, I sat down with my principal and I asked the simple question: how exactly am I supposed to meet each of the needs of the students in my class when I have some coming in on a 2nd grade level, some coming in on an 8th grade level, and everything in between? He looked at me, he said, "Mr. Rose, just do your best." That's kind of what we all do. And that actually is the message that teachers are getting today all across the country. We have been talking about math achievement in this country for decades. And usually the conversations end with a set of recommendations that boil down to raise the standards, improve the curriculum, train the teachers, recruit teachers, and instill curriculum. They're coherent, they are clear, and they don't solve the problem. Why? What are we missing? Why is it that from 2005, 4 years after NCLB, 23% of 12th graders were proficient in math, and 10 years later, 25% were proficient? If we just wanted 2 out of 3 kids to be proficient, that would take us 200 years. What are we missing? To answer that question, I'm going to use a word. The word is skill. But I want to assure my friends in the math community that when I say the word skill, I mean the procedural, the conceptual, and the applied ways of different mathematical concepts. We want kids to love math, to think like mathematicians, to appreciate its relevancy and its beauty, and we want them to learn real math skills that they're going to need in life. Here are some examples of skills that are taught in schools all across the country. From the time a student gets past basic numeracy to the time they're through algebra, there are roughly 300 of these skills. And they're organized in the same way they were organized when we were kids, around grade levels. The way this chart works is if you're in the 4th grade, there are 42 math skills that you need to learn to be proficient by the end of the year, but there are 22 predecessor skills you should have brought with you from before the 4th grade. So cumulatively, there are 64. When you get to the 5th grade, there are 40 new skills. Those built on top of not the entire 4th grade curriculum, but 30 out of the 42 4th grade skills and 19 pre-4th. Cumulatively, it's 89. And this is how math cascades over time. Policies over the last several decades have focused on the top box, making sure all kids have access to grade level curriculum, because kids can't learn what they haven't been taught, and if we want kids to catch up, they need to have access to that material. But access doesn't lead to social mobility. Mastery leads to social mobility. And while all policies are focused on the top box, students are coming in with gaps up and down the column, making it harder for them to learn, to master that grade level material. Now, some may say, well, what's the harm? Teach them the grade level, and maybe some of it will actually stick. But there is a harm, and the harm has to do with pace. In a typical school year, a student is supposed to learn 40 or 50 new skills over the course of the year. And if we assume a school year is 30 weeks, that comes out to, on average, a skill and a half a week. That's what the pace is supposed to be. But that almost never happens because students don't have the predecessor knowledge. There may be issues with teacher quality, materials, students' well-being. There isn't great data on how many skills kids do learn per week, but it's undoubtedly less than 1.5. The educators we talk to think it's somewhere in the 0.5 to 1 range. Now, what's the pace required for students to catch up? It's actually a very basic math problem. We look at the total skills of the grade level they're in, subtract what they already know, that tells us how many skills they have to learn, divide it by the number of weeks, and that gets us our pace. So if we have a 6th grade student, and there are 119 skills in the column, if the student knows 29, that leaves 90. And if we've got 30 weeks, that's a pace of 3 skills per week. It's just the math of how this all works. What that means, though, is that the pace required for many students to catch up far exceeds what can happen when only focusing on the top box. The left side are the grade levels. Across the top are the percent of the column that students know. In the middle, you see the required pace. In the schools we work with, students are coming in knowing 30% of the column, which means they need to learn between 1.5 and 3.4 skills per week for 30 weeks in order to catch back up. How do we solve this problem? Well, the answer is to begin to think differently about how we solve this by providing students with individualized pathways that connect where they're starting from to where they need to be. Personalized, competency-based learning. This is something I could have never done when I was a teacher. The idea of assigning and tracking and supporting each student on their own path would have been impossible to do. But now with new tools coming on, you've heard about some, there are others coming around the corner, this is more possible than ever. And even if the PACE targets are still too high, moving to personalized competency-based learning opens up new pathways. So for example, that 6th grade student that has to learn 3 skills a week, what if instead, we had that student focus on 8th grade proficiency? Instead of learning 3 skills per week, if they focused on 8th grade, there are 138 skills in the column. If they already know 18, that means they still need to learn 120, but they have 3 years to learn that. That means they could learn at a pace of 1.3 skills per week. And then after knowing 8th grade, we could go back and cover any of the skills in 6th and 7th grade that we didn't prioritize. To be clear, the goal of solving math is the same. Every student needs to have the skills to succeed in college or a career, to master those skills. But to get there requires that we confront what history has been telling us for decades, that math is sequential based on skills, and grade levels are sequential based on age. Those realities are in conflict, no matter how high the expectations, how skilled the teacher, or how well-written the curriculum is. Some states are starting to move in this direction. California just adopted a new math framework that moves from grade levels to grade spans. And North Dakota and Montana have recently launched math innovation zones for schools that want to explore personalized competency-based learning. But to be clear, most state policy and most federal policy is oriented around top box instruction. Solving math requires that we reframe the question. The question is, what is the best way to teach 50 million students 300 skills? We can continue to do it the same way we've always been doing it, organizing students by age and focusing on 40 or 50 each year and seeing what happens. That's the 200-year plan. Or we can begin to transition to personalized competency-based learning and give each student the kind of math education that is reflective of how math really works. Thank you.
We have a cultural predicament with how we approach math in the US. There's this acceptable norm where people intellectually self-select and divide themselves along the lines of good at math or bad at math, or I'm a math person or I'm not a math person. That process starts early in education, and if it sticks during high school, people are likely to define themselves that way for the rest of their lives. And that can have a huge impact on their career choices, on their wage potential, and on their upward mobility.
We lie to ourselves about how important math is for success. For example, 1 in 5 children graduate from high school when they don't succeed in algebra. So algebra success is the most determinant factor we know in K-12 of completing K-12, getting into college, and completing college. And success in math determines $1 million more in lifetime earnings.
A greater understanding of math can essentially mean a better understanding of the world. The data, the statistics, the trends that illuminate and drive the most compelling topics and fields of study are driven by math, which is why it's so important for every kid to have access to an engaging, a relevant, and exciting math experience both inside and outside the classroom.
The CERN is a nonprofit math learning platform, and we serve 1 in 4 elementary school kids in the country and more than 1 million middle school kids. And we believe all kids can be math kids, and we have to do the work as adults to make that true.
Changing a student's experience with math is about more than good textbooks. It's about providing teachers and students with materials and instructional approaches that engage them in understanding how math appears in our world every day. High-quality supports like CERN are helping thousands of teachers and students by making math more engaging.
So a lot of times how we teach math, it's a lot of tricks that are disconnected that you need to memorize. A lot of rules, and you don't know why those rules work. And what they do in countries that succeed in mathematics is they really focus on math making sense. Kids trust math. The technical name for the approach we use is called concrete to pictorial to abstract. And what that means is whenever we bring an idea forward in math, we don't start with symbols and gobbledygook and a lot of terms that no one understands. We'll start with actual concrete or pictorial objects. The intent isn't that you drop a kid on this platform and you never intervene again. There is an interaction with an adult. Adults get alerts as students are moving through the platform, indicating areas they need additional support.
The tone is shifting across states, across districts, and across schools where they're embracing a very much renewed focus on improving math achievement.
Across the country, states and districts that are engaging with CERN, making it work in their context, are seeing transformative results. DCPS, Tennessee, Texas, Nebraska, and most recently, 2 really exciting examples are Colorado and Ohio, where both governors have gotten engaged. Our impact on students who are Black, Latino, multilingual learners, other at-risk populations, students with IEPs, we have really strong results because what we're focused on is that all kids can succeed in mathematics.
The downsides of failing to address the problem of math education in the U.S. are severe. We need strong math skills for careers in the military, in science and medicine, and for careers outside those areas, where you wouldn't probably think that math would be focused. That's how we're going to make sure all citizens can grow and succeed.
Thank you again to our sponsors, Collaborative for Student Success, for their support. We are excited to now have Rebecca Peterson, the 2023 National Teacher of the Year, joining Bob Kuzak on stage.
Thanks, Sarah. So Rebecca, I've interviewed senators and presidents and never interviewed a Teacher of the Year. How do you become Teacher of the Year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every state sort of has a different way of selecting their state Teacher of the Year, and then the 55 state and territory Teachers of the Year do a portfolio. Then this year we went down to 5 finalists, flew us here to DC to do interviews and give a keynote, and then one is selected. But I always say I wasn't chosen because I'm like the best teacher, right? There's no such thing. I didn't win a competition. I was just selected to do a job this year.
And do you get a call? Is there an envelope somebody opens?
There's a call.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember much of the call. There's a lot of hyperventilating on my end.
Well, tell us about your background in teaching, and tell us about your, which I thought was very interesting in reading the background the staff put together, One Good Thing blog, and why you started that.
Yeah. So maybe rewind a little bit. I am an immigrant to the United States, and I'm the daughter of medical missionaries. So by the time I was 16, I'd lived in 4 different countries. And sort of reflecting on my education journey, I see how important math was for me. Like, as we moved, math really grounded me. To me, there's this like meditative, rhythmic aspect about math that sort of lets me kind of dive deep into myself. And it was the security blanket for me as we moved. And then eventually, I think that security blanket sort of shifted into like a cape, you know? It was the superpower that I had. And that's exactly what I want my students to feel, that there is this meditative aspect of math. There's the security in it, but then there's also the superpower that it gives you. And I feel very strongly that math should be opening doors for our students. So I love mathematics. I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in pure mathematics. I started my teaching career at the college level, and then after 3 years, decided to teach at the high school level. I thought, how hard can it be? Turns out it was hard. And I had one foot out the door. I really didn't think I was going to make it that first year. Then I serendipitously stumbled upon this community blog called One Good Thing. And it was a group of math teachers at the time that were committed to writing something good that happened in their classroom every day.
Every day.
Well,
almost every day.
Some of us were a little overly committed, and yes, every day. But we live by the mantra, every day may not be good, but there's one good thing in every day. And that quote, I mean, it just hit me viscerally, right? Because it didn't ignore the demands of my job, but it did insist on taking ownership of my day. So I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I just continued to write until I had written 1,400 good things from my classroom. And I really credit that, I think, is the intersection of reflection and gratitude to saving my career.
Now, you obviously love math.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have a lot of students over the years who've loved math.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with students who are like, math, cape, no, that's not me?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, as teachers, we know we have to capture a student's heart before we capture their mind, right? So to me, it's really important that I make those connections, that I learn my students' stories first and foremost, so that we can center their voices within our instruction. But then what I love about teaching math is that it is so ubiquitous. I mean, it is everywhere, right? Like, our calendar is based on time, which is based on numbers, right? I bet that when you make a decision, you analyze pros and cons, you weigh the risks, right? Maybe you've read an article and made a generalization or an abstraction. Like, we are doing math all the time. Everyone's a math person. And so that is what I want my students to leave with. I want them to just have this sort of broader sense of mathematics, that it's not just about computing numbers, it's about seeing the world through a really beautiful, ubiquitous lens.
Okay, so let's dive in to this. I know you've been talking about these type of issues, whether you're at the White House or visiting other schools. We'll talk about your travels in a little bit, but what do you think the education system is doing right, and where do you think significant improvements could be made?
Yeah, I think that as a system, we are starting to really embrace this idea that we need to personalize education. I think that the pandemic exposed that more than ever. And so I'm really so happy to see this shift of, again, learning our students' stories, knowing what they need as individual learners, and that we know that this like one-size-fits-all isn't going to cut it, right? Where I really see, and this is maybe partially my own bias as a secondary math teacher, I really see a need for different pathways in secondary mathematics. We've been doing this sort of Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2
In that order, right?
More
right.
or less,
Pretty much,
yeah.
yeah.
Some states maybe flip geometry and algebra too. Basically since the 1890s, like not 1990s, like 1890s. And you know, a few things have changed since then.
But what was that based on? I mean, I always assumed, I kind of did that in that order. Was strong in algebra, and maybe it didn't, they kind of got weaker. But I thought they were building blocks. Are they not?
Yeah, they are, but there's just so much more math, you know? I mean, where's our introduction to probability and statistics and data analysis, game theory, number theory, optimization, there's so much.
And that makes it more interesting for the student.
Yeah,
right.
and I think oftentimes, I have a minor in music, and you know, the way we teach music is there's these basics that all students need, right? Like they need to know how to read time signatures and keys, and they need to know their scales, but then like students get quite a bit of autonomy, and it's like, what instrument do you want to play? Right. Yeah, and I just sort of wonder, like, what would mathematics education look like if we really sat down and said, what do our students have to know? And then what would it look like to give them more autonomy? You know, like when students go up to my English teacher colleagues and say, I just don't like reading, my English teacher colleagues say, oh, we just haven't found you the right book yet. Right?
Right.
And so what would it look like when students say, I don't like math, and our response was, we just haven't found you the right problem yet?
Huh, interesting. Let's talk about COVID. What was the effect that you saw at the local level?
Yeah, you know, Oklahoma largely, I don't like this phrase, stayed open, but we stayed in person, or we came back in person that fall of 2020.
Quicker than other states.
Quicker than other states, yes. But even so, like in my district, my local district, a third of our students still chose a virtual option.
Okay.
And so we all just felt really off kilter, you know? Even those of us that were in person, sometimes our students would be quarantined for a month, 2 months at a time.
Sure.
They'd be in and out of distance learning. And there was extreme isolation, like no matter how you slice it, we just sort of felt off. And there's a fascinating study out of Stanford where they scanned, I think, 163 adolescent brains, and they found that brains post-pandemic are scanning the same way that pre-pandemic, only adolescent brains scanned had they undergone like abuse, neglect, or trauma. And that's really sobering as an educator because it suggests that, you know, maybe the brains of our students have totally changed. And so then the follow-up question has to be, what are we doing about that, right? And the good news is the science is really clear and connection is how we heal. And so back to our discussion earlier, I think that the educators I work with, it's so clear to us now more than ever that we have to help our students connect with each other, connect with their teachers, connect with the content, connect with themselves, and connect with their communities.
What about the effect on teachers and the problem of, there's the problem across many fields, healthcare, physician shortages, nurse shortages, teacher shortages. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, I mean, I say, you know, in my state of Oklahoma, we are in a teacher crisis. 10% of our workforce is emergency certified.
And has that gone up, like compared to 3 years ago, pre-pandemic?
Yeah. In 2011, I think we had 30-ish emergency certifications, and now we have over 4,000.
Wow.
So it's a crisis, you know? And then you add on this layer of that sort of feeling off kilter, right? And that we're often the front line workers for our students. And we're often holding so much for our students, but then when I take a step back, I wonder like who is holding our teachers, and sometimes it truly becomes too much.
Now you're traveling the country. Now that you won this contest, I know not best teacher of the year, But that's got to be a little different for you, right?
Yeah.
What have you learned on this kind of tour
Yeah.
across the country, coming to Washington, going to events, and do you miss your classroom?
Yeah, I miss my classroom a lot.
But this is pretty cool
This is
opportunity.
Yeah. No, this is
Get
the
to go to
year.
the White House.
Yeah. This is a year of a lifetime
Yeah.
for sure, and I know that it's just going to enrich my work as an educator. I think one of the greatest gifts of this year has been getting to connect with the other state and territory teachers of the year. Truly, any one of them could have done this job, and that is not lost on me. And so, getting to be a part of that group, to get to be a part, I'm going to say we're a team, and the way they support me and cheer me on my good days and my bad days is like nothing I've ever experienced, and it just makes me even more committed to bringing sort of that kind of collaboration and teamwork to the local level, and making sure that locally the teachers know and are reminded continuously that their work is so important.
We'll open it up to questions in a minute, but I do want to ask you a very important question. What is the role of parents?
What is the role of parents? Yeah, particularly in math education?
Particularly.
Okay. So I am a mom, and you know, how we talk about math is so important as parents. And it just breaks my heart when I hear friends, parents say, I'm just not really a math person, I'm not really good at math, because I mean, it breaks my heart for them, but it breaks my heart for their children as well, because we, as a culture, have sort of decided that it's okay.
Right.
But I don't think it's okay to be like, I can't really read.
To give up.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, but I think there's sort of, there's sort of this dichotomy here. And so as an immigrant, as a bilingual immigrant, I know language depicts culture, right? And so I feel so strongly that if we change the way we speak about math, it can change the culture around math. And so I really challenge my friends and parents to think about themselves as math people, to broaden their understanding of mathematics, and then also to stop speaking so much in binaries, right? Like I hear a lot like, you're an English person or you're a math person, right?
Yeah.
You're creative or you're analytical.
Right.
And that does our students such a disservice. You know, the mathematicians that I look up to so much that solved incredible problems intersected that creativity and that analytical process, right? And so, how we talk about math really matters.
That is important. Let's open up for questions. If anyone has a question, we can get in a couple. Wait for the mic so we can all hear you, and identify yourself and ask a quick question.
Paulo Di Maria. I'm with the National Association of State Boards of Education. Rebecca, big fan of yours. I want to build on what you just said about this pernicious, cultural thing we have in this country that some people just aren't good at math. Because in addition to parents who don't think they're good at math, I also think there are a lot of elementary school teachers who don't think they're good at math, and sometimes they project that on their students. And as you know, the tradition in this country is an elementary school teacher teaches all the subjects. And yet I've seen recently some elementary schools that are experimenting with differentiating, having math teachers at the elementary level. Can you reflect a little bit on whether you think that might be a good strategy worth pursuing in order to sort of get past that, some students just aren't good at math?
Yeah, I think, everything of course comes down to the local school and what your capacity is, but at my son's school, they do that starting in fourth grade. And I just think it's just beautiful because now you have kind of similar to what we do at the secondary level, right, where you can really kind of hone in on one or maybe two subjects and develop both a passion and like a skill for that. So where it works, I think it's such a beautiful model.
We'll get one more question, but a quick one.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consulting engineer. How do you motivate the kids to show what's in it for them when they learn math?
Yeah. I don't think it's any secret, but again, it's learning about them first and foremost as human beings. I want my students to know how much I care about them as individuals. I struggle with it. We say this statement a lot in education, like building relationships is the best classroom management tool, right? And I just like, I hurt a little bit when I hear that, because I don't think it's this transactional thing. I think that I operate at my best, they operate at their best when we are connected on this human level. And so I make it a real priority to learn them first and foremost as human beings, and then they really trust me, and I can really push them to some really big academic achievements.
That's a good answer. That's a very good answer. Well, your passion really comes through. I got to say that. Rebecca, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
If everyone could please join me in another round of applause for the 2023 National Teacher of the Year. So as we get ready for the next panel, I'm just here to remind you that that poll is still live, and we really appreciate all of you who have taken the time thus far to give us your responses. But if you haven't yet, slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and use the code, the hashtag, #TheHillEducation. We appreciate your responses. Thank you.
Next, please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage to talk with Bob Kuzak. Shailene Sharma is CEO of co-founder of Zern. Josh Reese is the Systematic Transformation Lead at the University of Texas at Austin Dana Center. And Dr. Tim Hudson is the Chief Learning Officer at Dreambox Learning. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for being with us today. Let me start off with just kind of a couple minutes on your interest, why you got in this, and your organization and their mission. Shalini, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to be here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shalini Sharma, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zern. Zern is a nonprofit. We're a top-rated math learning platform used by 1 in 4 elementary school students across the country and more than 1 million middle school students. The core idea of Zern is very simple, which is that all kids are math kids, and we can do work as adults to make that true. I'll talk about this more as we explore other questions, but in other countries, they do this. So it's not like we're the first people to get to the moon. We would be the 36th. So it's been done. In terms of my personal passion, contrary to what you might think, I wasn't always a math kid. Through the course of my studies in mathematics, through high school, college, I would describe myself as someone who scraped by. I would just make it over the line, in that calculus class or in those variety of STEM classes. But all along, I have just always loved math, and it has a lot to do with what the woman just shared, which is just its beauty and meditative aspects. And actually all kids can access that. And when you talk to people who love math, they will start to talk about a couple things. They'll talk about 2 ideas. One is knowledge is power. So what's cool about math is when you get the question right, you know you're right. You don't have to wait for the teacher to tell you if you're right. And that's incredibly empowering for all children. And the second is that more time you spend with math, and particularly as you understand math as a few big ideas, not a series of skills, you start to see its beauty. You start to see that math is the language that describes motion on Earth, the motion of all the planets, the entire universe, music, art, architecture. It's actually the beauty all around us. And we can give kids all of that. I know it's ambitious, but that's what they are doing in other countries.
Josh?
Thank you. Josh Recio. I'm with the Charles A. Dana Center out of the University of Texas at Austin. And I started, my father was a math teacher, which is why I swore I never would be. And I began to study statistics and decided I would teach sort of as I was, pursuing a statistics master's degree. And it turns out I really liked what I was doing. I really appreciated the education work. I was able to teach statistics in high school, and at that time was really sort of pushing for more students to take a statistics course at that time, and still in a lot of places, calculus was sort of seen as the gold standard course. That was where everyone wanted to get to. But I could see the relevance of statistics for a lot of our students. So I really pushed for that. Years later, ended up working for the Dana Center, which was an organization I respected tremendously. And the work I do now is really about pathways for students, and it's really about opening up statistics pathways. We're working right now in 22 different states to help them think about what their, what courses they offer students as they sort of exit out of high school. We get through that Algebra 1 geometry point, and then what happens. And so it all sort of, came back around to what I started off doing. It's work that I really appreciate.
Tim?
Thank you. Tim Hudson, and I work for Dreambox Learning. I'm the Chief Learning Officer. If you don't know about Dreambox, we have math and reading solutions that are personalized software used by about 6 million students around the country for about an hour a week to complement what's happening in the classroom. And I think my journey in math is related to the work that I do at Dreambox as well, because so much of math, in my experience as a student, and maybe yours as well, I don't know, give me some nods here, felt a little sit and get. A little bit, you go into the room, the teacher tells you stuff, and then you're supposed to remember it. Nobody's like, I can't wait to find out what occurs to me in math today, right? That's not how it typically is. And so when I joined Dreambox years ago, after having been a high school math teacher and district math leader, I wanted to build math experiences that felt to students like a game, where it was a think and do, not a sit and get. So at Dreambox, we don't have any video lectures or anything. We empower students to, have their own ideas and really leverage technology to do things that can't be done without technology. So you can play chess without a computer, or you can play chess on a computer. But there's only one way to do Super Mario on the computer, and the same way with Dreambox's lessons. And students don't need to sit through a bunch of did anybody teach Fortnite classes to get kids good at Fortnite? Right, we know kids are brilliant and that they are able to learn things when they're given the kinds of experiences that empower them to think, that support their brilliance. And so also, as a district math coordinator, I was keenly interested in impact, right? And you've heard everybody talk about it this morning. How do we, this morning, what time is it? We've heard everybody talk about needing to move the needle, improving math achievement, and I'm proud that our math solution definitely does that. We're excited to have a couple studies out, about four or five over the past 2 years, showing we've curtailed learning loss. So a lot of the districts using our solutions didn't have that learning loss. We have a first of its kind study with 77,000 students in South Carolina showing that students were 3 times more likely to achieve the state growth targets if they were below grade level when they used Dreambox, and students at the higher end were twice as likely. So really proud of that impact, all because we know students are brilliant and we want to empower that brilliance.
Shalini, Zern's focus is on K through 5th curriculum courses, and you mentioned other countries, and actually that was something I wanted to get into. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because the United States is very focused on the United States, but what can we learn internationally?
Yeah, so Zern, it was K-5,
Okay.
and we have launched middle school. So
Okay.
all of 6 to 8 is out, and there's 1 million kids now on 6 to 8.
1 million, right.
So it's off to the races. When you think about other countries, so just I happened to recently go to Japan. Just as a background knowledge, Japan is a country where we can say, oh, all kids are math kids. And then you can say, well, where in the world is that true? And the closest to that being true is Japan. So to give you a sense, their lowest performing students in 9th grade would be proficient by our standards. So you're doing pretty good, much better than us. Now, I'm not proposing that we then model ourselves after Japan on every dimension of our society. I'm sure there are things that are not working well in Japan. But it is interesting that kids are successful there, and shockingly successful compared to our kids. As a reminder, our 8th graders, 26% are proficient on the NAEP in 8th grade math, right? So that's not even algebra. That's the year before algebra. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are those countries doing?
Right.
Japan has been able to show these kinds of academic results for 50 years, 50, compared to what we've been able to show. So, Zern is a software-based solution that is used in classrooms and does the work and supports the work of great teachers. Japan didn't have technology 50 years ago. They weren't deploying software. They weren't doing personalized learning. They just weren't. And so I say that to you as somebody who is leading a nonprofit that has a software solution. And so we also can't say, oh, there'll be some magical software solution, then it'll all work, because that's just not true. What we look at when we look at countries where mathematics is successful, we see some differences in how they approach mathematics. Number one, they don't get into math wars. That's like what we do. They don't. They don't fight over should children learn concepts or procedures. They're like, both. Okay. We get into a war on that. That's the equivalent of, in English, saying, should a child be able to sound out this word and read it? Like the word comprehension. Should a child be able to sound that out? Or should they know what the word comprehension means? How about both? And so the first thing on all countries that exceed us in mathematics, they don't have math wars. They don't say, oh, children should have fluency in their basic math facts versus students should understand what multiplication means. We do that. The second thing is that they work very hard in how they present concepts to children. So, one of my favorite examples that I love to ask mathematicians is, why is 3 times 0, 0? So I'd ask folks in the room, like, anybody want to share, why is 3 times 0, 0? And if your answer is, it's a convention, n times 0 is 0, 8 times 0 is 0, a million times 0 is 0, that is correct, it is a convention. But there's an axiomatic proof of that convention. And 8-year-olds in high-performing countries are presented with that proof. And that proof is really simple, which is, imagine you have 3 plates of cookies, and on the 3 plates, there are 3 cookies on each plate. So if you think of that, that's 9 cookies. And so the first 3 is the number of plates, and the second 3 is the number of cookies. Now imagine if you have 3 plates and 1 cookie on each plate. Well, then you have 3 cookies. Well, imagine now if you have 3 plates and there are 0 cookies on each plate. Well, that is very upsetting because there are no cookies, right? And how can you ever forget that, right? Because you don't get any cookies. You'll never forget that. And so then that's why 8 times 0 is 0, n times 0 is 0, a million times 0 is 0. So we can present math at that axiomatic deep level if we wanted to. We just don't. We don't allocate the time. We don't support teachers with curricular materials, with training. For example, earlier we were talking about not having math expertise at the elementary school level, which can be done with math teachers allocated. There's a bunch of strategies we can use to do that. So anyway, where I would leave it is, those are the differences. And if technology then amplifies that, multiplies that, supports teachers with those kinds of differences, yeah, we'll see some changes. If technology actually furthers the math we are doing right now, we're not going to see any changes.
Josh, if you had a magic wand, what's something that frustrates you that you would fix with that wand?
Just one thing?
You got to pick one. Yeah, got to pick one.
I'll start with this one. There are a lot of amazing things happening in math education right now. I talked about opening pathways for students that are outside of the sort of traditional sequence of courses that students take. That algebra, geometry, algebra 2 that was talked about earlier, that's designed to send students on a singular pathway toward calculus. A lot of great things are happening to sort of veer away from that. So you're seeing data science courses pop up in places and other opportunities. The magic wand, if I had, would be to ask the next question, which is, these other pathways are great, these data science courses are great, all of these new things we're doing are great, but who has access to them? And right now, we still have an issue with that. There are still a lot of students that don't have access to the sort of these new things or the best opportunities within their math education. And so the work that we do at the Dana Center is very much focused on how do we make sure that any student, no matter where they come from, no matter their background, no matter their experiences, that they have access to those high quality math education. And I think that if the magic wand existed, I think that's where I would go first.
Tim, kind of same question to you. What's the biggest problem that could be tackled? I know you also focus on technology. Is that help? That's both, we've talked about AI earlier, and there's some concern, it could be great help, but you got to be cautious about it.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem here as we close out, getting close to the end of this, I think one of the biggest problems facing mathematics is there's a question out there that I don't think any of us have a good answer for, let alone a shared and agreed answer upon. And it's a fundamental question. What is math? If I asked you to write down your answer right now, where would it be? It'd be all over the place. So we've heard a lot of great ideas, but at its core, when I told people in college I was a math major, they were like, oh, what's 4,336 times 84.3? Like, what do you think we do, right? And so probably right now you're thinking, oh, math is computation, relationships, patterns, shapes maybe. But architects do that, sociologists do that, economists do that. And so what makes math, math? And I won't leave you hanging. The best definition I've found is Dr. Eugenia Chang. She's written a couple books about math, and it's simple. Math is the logical study of how logical things work. So, political science is not really a logical thing, but people are doing logical study of it, right? We know immunology. There's a logical study there, but how our bodies respond to things is not logical, even though we can find some patterns. And anybody proved triangles were congruent in high school? And you're like, okay, well, it's a triangle. It's got 3 sides, 3 angles. Is it the same as this one? Like, everything is stripped away. It's a logical thing. And the question is, okay, what's the minimum amount of information we need to know about these triangles to confirm, yeah, they're the same? But you can't ask a geneticist that. Show me the smallest amount of DNA to conclude this person has brown eyes. Like, nothing works that way. So why this is important for this particular conversation is 2 reasons. And one, as Shalini said a second ago, that's what the axiomatic approach is. That's a logical thing. There's logical reasoning there. But if we tell students every day that math is something you're going to use in everyday life, and that's a half-truth. It's not a promise we can keep. So when students say, when am I ever going to have to use this? That's not a complaint about math. That's a reaction to our false advertising. So we need to own that. And the second reason that's important is because students have that innate ability to reason logically about logical things. We were talking about pigs a little bit earlier. I don't know about their math skills, but I do know that baby chickens can do basic addition. Bees understand 0 as a number, which is pretty, humans didn't even know that for a while. And I know under the right conditions that 4th graders, they can invent the idea of unit fractions in under a week, just the same way the ancient Egyptians did and used for hundreds of years. We can talk about that later if you want. So students have that innate ability to reason logically. We just need to reframe it. So imagine if we said to students, look, life is hard. Throughout your whole life and career, you're going to be navigating situations where there's not enough information. There's too many variables. Everything is shifting. You don't know the right decision. You don't know how things are going to turn out. It's impossible to know. But hey, in math class, we strip all that away. We're just looking at things that we can control so that we can become better thinkers about those things that are out of our control. That would be what I would change.
Why don't we open up for questions for any of the panelists or all of them? If you can wait for the, if you can raise your hand if you had a question. Another one up front.
Paulo Di Maria again from the National Association of State Boards of Education. Big fan of each of your organizations and the things that you do. I want to go back to the point you made that fundamentally if we simply use technology to keep doing the things that we're doing, we're not really going to make a difference. Because I think that what I distill from that is it then comes down to that interaction in the classroom between the teacher, the content, and the children. Can you say a little bit, because I look at the firepower that's here on the stage and probably the firepower that's here in the room, and I keep thinking the literacy people have tipped. There's definitely tremendous momentum on the science of reading and changing the reading experience for our students. And I think seeing a lot of results. I loved the classroom experience because it showed us that teachers are sometimes scared Change is hard, and they don't trust their own judgment to think that this thing I'm looking at is going to make a difference, that my students will be able to handle it, that I'll be able to handle it. How do we bring ourselves together to actually put forth a set of actions and strategies that will lead to the kind of change that could, in fairly short order, start to make a big difference?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think that's a really big question, and I can't answer how do we come together and tip like literacy, but I would love to get to that answer, but I don't have it. Let me offer some thoughts in that direction. With regard to literacy, they started, it's easy for me to say this, but they started at an easier place, because nowhere in the United States of America do people think that when children can't read, it's because those children can't read and why are you being mean to them? Because they can do other things. Like, nobody thinks like that. When children can't read in large, if the large group of children are behind in reading metrics, in America, we get really mad at the adults. Why don't those adults teach those kids to read? What is wrong with them? Now, in this exact same country, in 2023, richest country in all of human history, when children can't do mathematics, we are like, please don't be mean to those kids. They are creative. They have other passions. They love ballet. And you're like, what? What does that have to do with math? And so there's no expectation still. And that's why our challenge is harder in mathematics. We first have to get mad. In terms of expectations that all kids can succeed in mathematics. And that's why I start with other countries. It's other humans are doing it. So we have to be able to do it. Now, in terms of the kind of steps, I really do think we have to understand some aspects of pedagogy, and specifically content pedagogy. So if you look at what they're talking about in literacy, they're talking about 3Qing, which is basically looking at 3 cues, the picture, guessing what the word was, and then moving to phonics. So actually knowing what the sounds and the letters make, learning that, and sounding out the word. So what's that in math? In math, what that is us careening from one side to the other of our own made-up math words. These math words are not replicating in 197 countries across the globe, so they can't be real. There are other things that replicate, like love, like friendship. We have things that we see in societies all around the world, and so we can say, oh, those are more real things. But our math wars are just ours. They're largely to get like a like on social media. That seems to be the purpose of them. And so the first thing I think we have to do is really just move past some nonsense math wars, which is what I was talking about. Those are things like you don't pick between procedures and concepts, you do both. And then where I would end is really using strategies we see in the top performing countries and getting excited about those, which are using the strategies of pictures, representations, making math pictorial. And so the concept is concrete to pictorial to abstract. This is the pedagogy we see in the top performing countries universally. And that's a pedagogy we have to bring in. And so, in upper level mathematics, that is drawing graphs, drawing images. In elementary school mathematics, that is concrete objects. And so I'd say those are some of my answers moving in that direction.
Can I add just one quick thing to the getting frustrated with students or not wanting to be mad at the students who aren't successful? The way that we've talked about what is good at math is getting an answer right, or which especially in early grades is based on the fact that kids are just naturally good at getting the answer right in a math problem. What we have to do is start rewarding the effort, the work that they're putting in, the problem solving that they're going through, and not just think about it as who's right and who's wrong.
I'll give you the last word, 30 seconds.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think by and large, even though there are some math wars, everyone probably agrees, hopefully, that sense-making should be a goal. I've worked with plenty of students who can do procedures perfectly. I know I could. Anybody borrow and subtract perfectly? I could do that in school, but then when I went to the store and gave them a $10 bill for a $6 and 84-cent thing, and they like counted 85, 80, they like counted up to 10, I was like, what sorcery is this? Because I hadn't made sense of those things. So as long as we have that common goal, math isn't a spectator sport. Students are brilliant, and as long as we invite them to think for themselves, we're going to be successful. Because when you think about it, math just makes sense.
Well, we are out of time. There's a great discussion on math that included chickens and cookies and pigs, which was not on my bingo card. Please thank the panelists for joining us.
On behalf of the Collaborative for Student Success, I just wanted to say I hope you all enjoyed the programming today. I also want to remind you that the last polling question actually asks you to rank various messages that you've seen today. If you haven't yet done that, please take the time to do so. I hope you'll stay in touch with us, the Collaborative for Student Success. If you'd like to learn more about us, find us at forstudentsuccess.org. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and that concludes our program. You can find the entire program on thehill.com/events, as well as our YouTube page. And thank you all for joining us today. If you're in this room, please help yourself to refreshments. Thank you.